In February of 1959, 9 experienced hikers set out into the Ural Mountains of Russia. They were students and graduates of the Ural Polytechnical Institute, experienced mountaineers, people who had done this before, who knew the mountains, who knew the cold, who knew how to survive in one of the harshest environments on Earth. They never came back. What investigators found when they finally reached the campsite was so disturbing, so inexplicable, so fundamentally wrong in every detail that the Soviet government classified the case, sealed it, buried it, told the families of the 9 dead hikers that the cause of death was a compelling unknown force. A compelling unknown force. That was the official explanation. For 9 trained mountaineers who died in the night on a remote mountain in the Urals. No further explanation was given. No suspects were named. No charges were filed. The case was closed. And for 30 years, it stayed closed. Tonight, we are going to open it again. Breathe deeply, relax, and come with me to the coldest and most disturbing unsolved mystery of the 20th century. Close your eyes. Imagine you are a rescue worker in the Ural Mountains of Russia, February of 1959. It is minus 30 degrees Celsius. The snow is deep. The wind is howling across the open mountain slopes. You have been searching for 9 missing hikers for weeks, and then you find the tent. It has been cut open from the inside, not unzipped, not opened normally, cut with a knife from the inside, and all around the tent, in the snow, are barefoot footprints. 9 people fled their tent in the middle of the night, in minus 30-degree temperatures, without their boots, without their warm clothing, without their equipment. They ran away from their shelter, into the freezing darkness, and into whatever was waiting for them out there. What were they running from? That question has haunted investigators, researchers, and families for more than 60 years. And tonight, we are going to search for the answer, together, calmly, in detail, without rush, because the Dyatlov Pass incident is a mystery that deserves all the time in the world. Relax completely. Let the tension leave your body. Let your breathing become slow and deep. There is no rush tonight. There is only silence, and the echo of 9 lives that ended without explanation on a frozen mountain in 1959. The story of the Dyatlov Pass incident begins with a group of 10 hikers who set out from the city of Sverdlovsk, now called Yekaterinburg, in January of 1959. Their leader was Igor Dyatlov, a 23-year-old engineering student who was an experienced and respected mountaineer. The other members of the group were similarly experienced. Several had participated in previous expeditions to the Urals and beyond. Their goal was to reach the summit of Otorten, a mountain in the northern Urals. It was a difficult but manageable route for people of their experience level. One member of the group, Yuri Yudin, fell ill shortly after they set out and had to turn back. He was the only one who came home alive. He spent the rest of his long life. He died in 2013, trying to understand what happened to his 9 friends. The group's last known photographs were taken on February 1st. They show the hikers making camp on the slopes of a mountain they called Kholat Shachol, in the Mansi language of the indigenous people of that region. Kholat Shachol means dead mountain, the mountain of the dead. That night, something happened. No one knows exactly what. No one who was there survived to tell the story. But the physical evidence that investigators found weeks later paints a picture that is deeply, profoundly disturbing. When search parties finally reached the campsite on February 26th, what they found defied immediate explanation. The tent had been cut open from the inside, not at the entrance, not where you would cut if you were trying to get out normally, but along the sides, as if someone inside had needed to escape very quickly, and cutting was faster than finding the zipper. All of the hikers' belongings were still inside the tent: their food, their warm clothing, their boots, their equipment. They had left everything in -30-degree temperatures, and they had run. The footprints in the snow told investigators that all 9 hikers had walked away from the tent in a relatively calm and organized manner, not running, walking, in pairs and small groups. They walked approximately 500 meters down the slope toward a nearby forest. And then, in the forest, investigators found the first 2 bodies. Yuri Doroshenko and Yuri Krivonishenko were found near the remains of a small fire they had tried to build. They were barefoot. They were wearing only underwear. The branches of the tree above them had been broken off up to 5 meters high, as if they had climbed the tree and broken branches to see something, or to get away from something. Both men had died of hypothermia. Moving back up the slope toward the tent, investigators found 3 more bodies: Igor Dyatlov, Zinaida Kolmogorova, Rustem Slobodin. Their positions suggested they had died trying to return to the tent, as if whatever had driven them away had passed, and they had tried to go back, but never made it. Slobodin had a small crack in his skull, but investigators determined it was not enough to have caused his death. He too died of hypothermia. The remaining 4 hikers, Lyudmila Dubinina, Alexander Zolotaryov, Alexander Kolovatov, and Nikolai Thibault Brignol, were not found until May, 2 months later, hidden under 4 meters of snow in a ravine near the forest. And what the medical examiners found when they examined these 4 bodies changed the entire nature of the investigation. Thibault Brignol had massive skull fractures, the kind of injury caused by an enormous blunt force impact, not a fall, not a fight with another person, something with extraordinary force. Zolotaryov had multiple fractured ribs on both sides of his chest. The medical examiner compared the force required to cause these injuries to the impact of a high-speed car crash. But there were no external wounds corresponding to these injuries, no bruising on the skin, no lacerations, no marks that would indicate someone or something had struck them from outside. The injuries were internal, as if the force had been applied from within, or from something that left no trace on the surface of the body. And Lyudmila Dubinina had no tongue. Her tongue and the soft tissue of her mouth and throat were missing. Gone. The official explanation was that she had been lying face down in a stream of water that ran through the ravine, that the soft tissue had decomposed or been eaten by small animals. But researchers have noted that the other soft tissue on her body had not decomposed in the same way, just the tongue. There was one more detail that investigators noted, and that has never been satisfactorily explained. The clothing of some of the hikers showed levels of radioactive contamination significantly above normal background levels. Radioactivity. On the clothing of hikers who had died in a remote mountain pass, with no nuclear facility anywhere near the location. The Soviet investigation lasted several months. Investigators interviewed dozens of witnesses, examined the physical evidence extensively, and reached a conclusion that has frustrated researchers ever since. They concluded that the hikers had died as a result of an overwhelming natural force, possibly an avalanche, possibly extreme weather. But the physical evidence did not support an avalanche. There were no signs of avalanche activity at the campsite. The tent was intact except for the cuts from the inside. The footprints in the snow showed organized movement, not the chaos you would expect from survivors of an avalanche. The case was classified, the files were sealed, and the families of the 9 dead hikers were told nothing more than they had already been told: a compelling unknown force. In 2019, more than 60 years after the incident, Russian authorities reopened the investigation. They reviewed the evidence, they conducted new computer simulations, and they concluded that the most likely cause of death was a small, delayed avalanche. An avalanche that struck the tent after the hikers had set it up. That forced them to cut their way out quickly. That carried some of them down the slope with tremendous force, explaining the massive internal injuries. Some scientists who have reviewed the Russian government's 2019 report have found it plausible. Computer models do suggest that certain avalanche configurations could cause the kind of injuries observed without leaving the typical physical signs of an avalanche. But many researchers remain unconvinced because several details still do not fit: the missing tongue, the radioactive contamination, the position of the bodies, the fact that some of the hikers appeared to have died trying to return to the tent after the initial event. If it was simply an avalanche, why did some of them try to go back? What were they going back to? Or what were they going back from? For 6 decades, the Dyatlov Pass incident has generated theories, dozens of them, hundreds of them. The first and most persistent theory is the military one. The Soviet Union in 1959 was in the middle of the Cold War. The Ural Mountains were a region of significant military activity, secret weapons programs, missile tests, nuclear experiments. Some researchers believe that the hikers stumbled onto something they were not meant to see: a military test, a weapons experiment, something classified, and that the Soviet military, rather than risk exposure, eliminated the witnesses. The injuries suffered by some of the hikers, particularly the massive internal trauma with no external wounds, are consistent with the effects of certain experimental weapons. Pressure waves, infrasound devices, weapons that could cause massive internal damage without leaving marks on the surface of the body. The radioactive contamination on the clothing supports this theory. If a military test involving radioactive material had been conducted in the area, the hikers could have been exposed. The second major theory involves the indigenous Mansi people of the region. The mountain where the hikers died, Kholat Shachol, was considered sacred by the Mansi, a forbidden place, a place where outsiders were not welcome. Some researchers have suggested that the hikers were killed by Mansi tribesmen who were protecting their sacred territory. But investigators at the time found no evidence of other human presence at the campsite. No footprints other than those of the 9 hikers. No signs of a struggle with other people. The third theory involves infrasound. Infrasound is sound at frequencies below the range of human hearing. It cannot be heard consciously, but it can be felt, and at certain frequencies and intensities, it can cause profound physiological and psychological effects. Panic, disorientation, extreme anxiety, the feeling of an invisible, threatening presence. Some researchers have suggested that wind conditions in the Ural Mountains that night created infrasound frequencies that caused the hikers to experience overwhelming panic, to feel that something terrible was happening, something they could not see or hear consciously, and to flee their tent in a state of irrational terror. This theory would explain why they left so quickly and so chaotically, why they left their warm clothing behind, why they ran into the freezing night without stopping to think rationally about what they were doing. But it does not explain the massive physical injuries suffered by some of the hikers. Infrasound does not crush ribs. Infrasound does not fracture skulls. There is one witness account from that time period that has never been fully explained. Several groups of hikers and locals in the Ural Mountains region reported seeing strange orange spheres of light in the sky above the mountains during the days around the time of the Dyatlov incident. These were not one or two isolated reports. Multiple independent witnesses in different locations reported the same phenomenon. Orange glowing spheres moving silently through the night sky above the Urals. The Soviet military acknowledged that they had been conducting rocket tests in the region during that period, and some researchers believe the orange lights were simply rocket exhaust or debris from these tests. But others note that rocket exhaust does not typically form persistent glowing spheres that hover and move in ways inconsistent with ballistic trajectories. The orange spheres were seen the night the hikers died, and they were seen again on the night the last 4 bodies were found. What were they? We do not know. Then there is the condition of the hikers' skin. Multiple witnesses who saw the bodies after they were recovered reported that the skin of some of the hikers had turned an unusual orange or tan color. This discoloration has been attributed to decomposition and exposure to the elements, and that explanation may well be correct. But some researchers have noted that similar skin discoloration has been reported in cases of radiation exposure, of exposure to certain chemical agents, of exposure to phenomena that are not well understood scientifically. Combined with the radioactive contamination found on the clothing, this detail has led some researchers to conclude that the hikers were exposed to something at or near the campsite that caused unusual biological effects. Alexander Zolotaryov, one of the 4 hikers found in the ravine with the most severe injuries, has his own fascinating mystery. He was the oldest member of the group at 37, significantly older than the other hikers who were mostly in their early to mid-20s. After the Soviet archives were partially opened following the collapse of the Soviet Union, researchers discovered something surprising about Zolotaryov. He had a complex and somewhat mysterious background. He had served in World War II. He had worked in various capacities that are not entirely clear from the available records. And some researchers have suggested that he may have had connections to Soviet intelligence services. Was Zolotaryov on the expedition for reasons other than mountain climbing? Was he observing something? Investigating something? Meeting someone? And then there is the camera. Among the belongings found at the campsite were several cameras belonging to members of the hiking group. Investigators developed the film from these cameras, hoping to find photographic evidence of what had happened. Most of the photographs were what you would expect: images of the hikers during their journey, camp life, landscapes. But on one roll of film, there were several frames that were heavily overexposed. Frames taken in the dark that showed only blurred light. No recognizable shapes, no identifiable objects, just light. Bright, blurred, unidentifiable light. Photographed in the dark of the night on Dead Mountain. By someone who pointed their camera at something they saw and tried to capture what it was. What did they see? The film cannot tell us, but the fact that someone in that tent that night looked at something in the darkness and thought it important enough to photograph, that detail has stayed with researchers for 60 years. The Dyatlov Pass incident has been studied by journalists, scientists, military analysts, paranormal researchers, and ordinary people around the world who simply cannot let go of the mystery. More than 60 years after those 9 hikers died on Dead Mountain, their story continues to draw new investigators, new theories, new attempts to finally understand what happened in those final hours on that frozen mountain slope. Yuri Yudin, the 10th hiker who turned back sick before reaching the mountain, spent 54 years trying to find out what killed his friends. He reviewed the evidence repeatedly. He met with investigators. He read every document he could access. He never found a satisfactory answer. He died in 2013, still searching. 9 people died. They were experienced. They were prepared. They were not careless. Something drove them from their tent in the middle of the night into temperatures that would kill a human being within hours. And that something, whatever it was, has never been definitively identified. And so, as the winds continue to blow across the slopes of Dead Mountain, and as the snow continues to cover whatever secrets that mountain still holds, you can rest tonight. Let your mind relax. Let your thoughts settle like snowflakes on a quiet night. There is something strangely comforting about unsolved mysteries, about the fact that the world is complex enough, vast enough, and strange enough that some things resist our attempts to understand them completely. Tonight, let their memory accompany you as you sleep. Close your eyes, breathe deeply, and dream of mountains and mystery and the enduring human need to understand. Good night.